Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Abergan. This day, October 17th, let's go to the year 1860. It is an election year. Who is running for president? Abraham Lincoln, of course. You can picture the guy. Picture him, tall, skinny, big hat, big beard. Let me stop you right there, though, on that last point, because at this moment, just before being elected, Abe Lincoln has no beard. But that was about to change, perhaps in part because of a letter that was written to him right around this time in 1860 by an 11-year-old girl from Westfield, New York, Grace Bedell. In it, she urged Lincoln to grow a beard already. And Lincoln, as we all know, he did. So I'm going to read from this letter in a second. But first, let me say that here to discuss the correspondence, Lincoln's beard, maybe a little presidential facial hair history as well, are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
I'm going to read from the letter in a second. Let me just say that I find this story charming as hell.
It's so sweet.
I was kind of wondering if you're starting to grow a bit of a beard there, Jody, just in response to this letter.
No, and I actually think this got me thinking about beards as tactical political maneuvers versus beards as out of sheer laziness, and perhaps maybe which is how I grow a beard. But perhaps maybe Lincoln, this was licensed for him to be lazy and just let his hair grow. But here's the setup and here's the moment. So Grace Bedell, 11 years old, from New York, from Westfield, New York, writes Lincoln a letter. I think it's dated the 15th of October, 1860, in the heat of the election. And part of the letter, I'm going to read from it here. She says, "My father has just come home from the fair and brought home your picture." Presumably this is, campaign poster or something. She says, "I am a little girl, only 11 years old, but I have got 4 brothers and part of them will vote for you anyway. And if you will let your whiskers grow, I will try and get the rest of them to vote for you. And you would look a great deal better, for your face is so thin. All the ladies like whiskers, and they would tease their husbands to vote for you, and then you would be president." She says a couple other things, but that's the heart of the letter. We'll read Lincoln's response in a second, but I don't know, reactions to Grace's very precocious letter?
I love it.
Well, she's 11 years old, and she's perfected the art of the neg. Right?
Yeah.
She's just like, you could be president if we hid your thin face.
Right. It's not that you'll look great with the beard. Not just that. It's also that you have a bit of a thin face here.
But it's like the first, our country's first stylist, right? Like,
right.
This is what pairs well with an election.
Yeah.
Facial hair.
Right.
It bodes well.
There is a larger story here probably about, Lincoln, maybe one of the first presidents, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but, people are seeing his face more and more because of sort of just means of distribution and photography, early photography, and just sort of like photos and newspapers and so forth. So I think appearance has something to do with it. It is also the case that I think beards are becoming just in vogue over these couple of years. I mean, Grace has her finger on the pulse.
That's
what
right.
I'm trying to say.
She is on fashion's cutting edge.
But either way, I think it's just sweet that, that she's invested as a 11-year-old girl. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And thinking about this.
And also understands how women's political power works in a world in which women don't get to vote. She's like, women are going to pressure their husbands to vote for you, is also extremely precocious.
Yeah, that's a generous and sophisticated way of interpreting it. The other one is also that Grace starts to understand how shallow our politics are about to become, right? And she's maybe like identifying the dawn of political decisions based entirely on appearance and vibe, and not platform.
Not who you can have a beer with, but who you can grow a beard with.
Who you can grow a beard with. There you go. Perfect. Okay, so Lincoln writes back. First off, Lincoln writes back like 2 days later. You're candidate for president. You got other things going on. He's going to just drop everything and write a note back to this 11-year-old girl. And he says, "My dear little miss, your very agreeable letter of the 15th is received. I regret the necessity of saying I have no daughters. I have 3 sons, one 17, one 9, and one 7 years of age. They, with their mother, constitute my whole family. As to the whiskers, having never worn any, do you not think people would call it a piece of silly affection if I were to begin it now? Your very sincere well-wisher, A. Lincoln."
Again, amazing.
Yes.
It is the most charming letter. And it shows him also thinking about the political optics of this, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I could grow a beard, but maybe people will think like I'm putting on airs or putting on hairs in this way that...
You really prepped well for this segment.
really got into it.
The fact that this is like fan mail, So to be able to have a response, I don't think most people expect responses, especially when most candidates have other things to do. But the fact that he wrote her back, addressed each and every one of her questions, it's just a very kind of sweet thing to do that he didn't have to do, but that is meaningful. And it's interesting to see how the rest of his facial hair plays out over time as a result of this letter.
I want to get to that, but there's actually one tidbit, from the first letter that I think is worth mentioning. Grace signs her off with, "I must not write anymore," which I love because it's just this idea that like the letter's written in real time and she has like other things to do and has to run off, which is interesting. Like, that's the kind of thing you would say, like if you're on a phone, it's like, I got to run, but it's just a great little detail. But then she says, the last thing she writes to Lincoln in her first letter is, "Answer this letter right off. Goodbye, Grace Bedell." But she like commands him, "You better respond to me." Yep. And then of course he does.
It worked.
Yeah. As we know, Lincoln grows a beard. NIki, does he do it right away? I mean, is Grace responsible here?
I mean, I think that Grace does play a part in it. He doesn't do it right away. He waits until after the election when he wins the election. He goes in to November barefaced, and he comes out of November starting to grow some whiskers. And in fact, he is going to interact one more time with Grace Bedell in a way that makes the story even more charming than it is already.
So I should say first that you can look at pictures to see the slow progression of Abraham Lincoln's beard, which I think is really cool. He never grows a mustache, which is interesting, but the beard does become in full effect, and I think that's really special. So that by the time you get to February 19th, this is the inaugural journey from Springfield to Washington, D.C., and people are all gathered around to try to get a glimpse of their new president, Abraham Lincoln. And there is a moment of commotion. People are trying to, get closer and closer to the president. And a man with his daughter of apparently 12 or 13 years of age introduces Lincoln and says that this was his correspondent. This was the young girl that wrote to him. And Lincoln looks at her, he stoops down and he kisses the child and talks to her for several minutes and says that her advice had not been thrown away. And it's just such a sweet thing for the young girls, little cute cheeks to have been tickled by the stiff whiskers of Abraham Lincoln.
Very charming. Though I will say that my favorite coda to this would have been if her reaction had been what my daughter's reaction is when I give her a kiss and I have a beard. She's like, "Oh, it's like spiky, scratchy, like get away from me, like go shave," If Grace had called him out and been like, "Oh, that was a terrible idea. Why'd you take my advice?"
It's like, why are you taking fashion tips from an 11-year-old? This was a terrible idea.
It's so funny just to think about this encounter and just how he's like, look at my whiskers, I've been growing them for you. Like, that to me was just like, I love this story. It can't get any sweeter.
I have one sort of sidebar thought here, but the movie Lincoln, right, is set in 1865. I know it's a number of years later, but this is Steven Spielberg. This story is the most feel-good possible story. Like, the fact that they didn't put it in like a little flashback or something, like you could see Steven Spielberg bending over backwards to somehow include an 8-minute little story here of just like Lincoln randomly remembering this moment so that he could just include it. Like it should be in a big blockbuster hagiographic film about Lincoln, and I'm surprised that it was not.
And even the way, it kind of ends on a solemn note. It's like, he kissed me and then I never saw him again. Like that whole, there's almost like an impending doom there that comes along that we don't, quite comprehend at the moment. But it's a very sweet story. And a lot of these stories feel very, apocryphal, like that didn't happen. But knowing that this one did, it makes it all the more special.
But she did write another letter to Lincoln a few years later, right? It doesn't fully end at this moment, right before inauguration, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one is a little less heartwarming, I think. She's 15 years old at the time. It's 1864, and she writes to Lincoln to ask if he can get her a job in the Treasury Department because she wants to be able to help her parents out financially. And she never hears back from him. She's also 15. I realize child labor laws aren't what they are now, but it's one of those things where you see this young teenager seeing her family struggling and reaching out to the president for help. And obviously, Lincoln had a lot on his plate in 1864, a lot of things going on, even more than in 1860. So he can't be faulted for not writing back. But it is it's a bittersweet moment.
Yeah. A few little codas here. This becomes a very popular story, especially after Lincoln's assassination. There is a statue depicting a meeting between Lincoln and Bedell. It's located in Westfield, New York, which we should say is sort of upstate, outside of Buffalo, off of Lake Erie. And then there's this interesting thing that happens not that long ago in 2009, where a descendant of the Bedell family kind of is skeptical of this story and thinks it's just one of those family lore, but then actually discovers the letter as part of a Lincoln bicentennial exhibition that's taking place in 2009.
That's a pretty cool moment. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you imagine? She's a staff member. She's 23. She's a staff member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and she's always heard this story her whole life, and she never believed it because it just sounded, apocryphal and too good to be true. So as she's going through Lincoln's papers in preparation for this big bicentennial exhibition, she sees, with malice toward none, and then happens upon a case containing 2 handwritten letters dated October 15th, 1860, addressed to the Honorable Abraham Lincoln, signed Grace Bedell. And the other one, October 19th, 1860, also addressed to my dear little miss, signed A. Lincoln.
What percentage of family lore, when you research it, actually ends up being true, right? I feel like so often it's like, don't actually look into that story. Like, you're not, like in my family that my grandfather used to say, like, we're related to Ben Franklin. And I'm like, sure, I'm not going to actually look into that. What good is going to come from me actually looking into that? Sure, I'm a long lost relative of Ben Franklin. That's not really changed my day to day. I'm fine with it. But this one is great. They poke into it. She's skeptical. She pokes into it. Actually true.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
That's crazy. That's crazy. The only story that comes close to that is Nettie Washington Douglas, who's like the descendant of Frederick Douglass and of Booker T. Washington, tells a story about how she was playing with some cane and her grandmother admonished her and was like, put that away. Abraham Lincoln gave that to Frederick Douglass. Or something crazy like that. But it's along those lines. Yeah. But, she had no idea who her ancestors were at this moment. She's playing around with these artifacts. I feel like until she became an adult, she was very much aware of who she descended from. But that's just kind of crazy to me, too.
But wait, what's her name? the
Her
woman?
name is Nettie Washington Douglas, and Frederick Douglass's grandson married Booker T. Washington's great-granddaughter.
But if that's her name, you'd think that's a little bit of a tell.
There's some clues.
But if you're a child, you're not thinking about
Fair
their name. I probably have the family genealogy wrong, but it's a Douglas descendant marries a Washington descendant. Put it that way.
Fair enough. Okay. Final thoughts here, just on Lincoln's beard. I mean, I feel like, every generation since maybe Lincoln's time, like everyone, there's probably like age like 18 or 19, you have this moment where you realize that Abe Lincoln didn't always have a beard. And there's this moment where you're like, look at a photo of early Abe Lincoln, you're like, whoa, I just feel like every generation is blown away by that just because it's so built into his look. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that of sort of what it means to look at early pictures of Abe Lincoln and realize that this was a human being who grew a beard at some point.
Well, I don't know if you all have seen a photograph of the sexy Abe Lincoln statue where he's like shirtless, wearing low-slung pants, and doesn't have a beard. And the statue is basically making the case that Abraham Lincoln did not need to grow a beard in order to become electable or even, let's say, a centerfold of sorts.
This is also a man who did not find himself incredibly attractive and always had sort of like self-deprecating humor about the way that he looked. But I don't know, I think it's interesting too, because, you don't, nowadays, no one wears facial hair, elected officials.
Right.
I can't think of a president in a contemporary moment that has had a beard. I think of Lincoln. I think of Luther B. Hayes had a serious beard. Ulysses S. Grant. But I don't know. What's the first faceless beard? I mean, what's the first?
No, I mean, there's like these, there are these cool faceless.
What's the first hairless president?
The final, it's the real final breakthrough glass ceiling is when we elect the nation's first faceless.
That's
president.
Right.
There's these great infographics that show just like, basically every president had a beard, and then it just stops with, I think Truman had a beard when he entered office and then left, and no one since. But, like Adams, Van Buren, Taylor, Lincoln, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Roosevelt, Taft, all had beards, and then it just stopped.
Wow.
So, folks, he did that off the top of his head.
Yeah, my internet's down. I just did that off the top of my head. But I'd be willing to bet that it comes back, maybe. I mean, beards are very much coming back now. But though you would have thought that maybe in the 70s.
The 70s was probably
know.
a good shot. I think once we have our first hipster president, which we haven't had yet, we might see the return of at least a mustache.
Yeah, Beto would have worn a beard. Would have grown a beard.
Julian Castro probably would have.
But like Ted Cruz is growing a beard, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's like this idea that it is starting to.
I think that might kill beards forever. Actually,
That's a good point. That's a very
Cruz
good
has got it. I don't want it.
All right, that brings us to the end of the episode. Shout out to Grace Bedell. What a charming letter. Listeners, try and write at some point in your life a letter as charming as Grace's, or respond to letters in as charming a way as Lincoln.
or as timely a way as he did.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Try and respond to correspondence within 2 days. No. That's the real lesson here. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always,
Thanks, Jody.
and Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.
From